And we're back. Happy Monday, everybody. It is April. It's April 4th. It happens so fast. I can't believe it. We are working on Finding Latinx. This week, we are working on Chapter 5, having a discussion called Unbroken. Some of the banners that I'll bring up, the quotes that I'm pulling from the book, might be a little sensitive. There's some mental health issues, some talk about what are people saying these days? Unaliving yourself in the youth community, the Latinx community, and then some statistics that are kind of scary, and then we'll talk a little bit about what it was like in 2017, 2018, 2019 before the pandemic. Okay. So, like I said, Chapter 5, and the topic is Unbroken. Okay, I'm going to bring on our guests. First off, Richard McCrow, who has been with me since the beginning.
Hi, everybody.
And then a big welcome back to Season 3. Mr. Mike Walsh. Hello.
That's a pretty good greeting. Hi there.
Yeah, he's back.
I'll have to sit up straight.
Yes.
Or you sit really close and you gotta.
Before we jump in, though, because I learned I want to start doing this at the beginning of the session instead of at the end, because then I'll forget. So I want to call attention again to my dear friend Dana Grande's book, A Ballad of Love and Glory. This is amazing historical fiction about love and glory. It's about the St. Patrick's Battalion that fought with the Mexican Army during the Mexican-American War in Texas. And then this book I have not read, Julissa Arce, You Sound Like a White Girl. We've been, Keith brought up last week, maybe we should read this next. It's about language and assimilation in the United States, you know, when we have to sound like a white girl to get by. Really interesting. Both of these books came out last month, so they're fresh, brand new. They're touring right now. They're going to be both of them book tours happening. There's a lot of stuff on social media about both of their books. You Sound Like a White Girl by Julissa Arce. Okay, and then Mike, I don't know if you knew this, but I created a store for Epic merchandise. We've got merch. None of it says Epic yet, but still at bonfire.com. And I'm going to show the page. Proceeds will go to purchasing books for students and helping us create more content and more designs. Let me bring up shared it last week, but I'm going to keep sharing it. We've sold just a couple of things, but it's been really fun. So here's the store. This is Epic. So it's bonfire.com store. This is Epic. And a friend and I were talking about how much we love cheese, and we were learning French. So we decided this would be a good design, avec fromage, which means with cheese. I think this is, I got my shirt already. Tank top to work out in. And then this is my favorite. No more fucks to give mug. And no more fucks to give shirt. Okay. This conversation has a lot to do with, you know, how much we care about the things that we're doing and how we are driven to the brink each time. But then we always give one more. But I thought it was a fun, clever thing to kind of design.
I'm designing these. I'd like to thank you in advance for helping me with my Christmas shopping. I already know where I'm headed. So thank you.
Yes, we've sold mugs and shirts. People are really liking them, and I'm having fun designing them because, you know, I was saying that we always say we should put that on a shirt, and then it's like, okay, well, why don't we put it on a shirt, sell it, and then use the money to help these projects that we're working on. So that's what we're doing. Okay. Any, either of you have anything you want to mention before we jump in?
I'm excited to be here in this conversation. I was a little nervous at first. Like, what do I know about finding a Latinx? What, I don't even know what that term is. Oh, as I started to read the book, I'm
Yeah.
in. So I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're all there. We're all there. I mean, I think that we can say that the conversation about the term itself is ongoing and controversial, and some people don't want to use it. They don't want anything to do with it. But it's like I started leaning towards it. I was like, I'm Latina, and that's all I care about. But then when you really think about what the X is replacing in terms of colonization and inclusion on the other side, then I really thought, what? It's not my problem. I don't have a problem with it. So why am I going to fight against it, or why am I going to make a big deal out of it? And so when people argue really wholeheartedly against it, it just makes me want to fight harder to say we should be using it.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's the first time I've read something where I understand especially when it talked about Hispanic. And Letty and I have talked to this using that term, and I thought, where do I stand on this? And I have had friends of mine that are Latino say, I am a Latino and not a Latinx, and which is, call people what they would like to be called. But I also understand that when I use Latinx, that now I've got the understanding to explain why I use it. And I think that's those first chapters are good in that, and I appreciate it.
Yep. Okay, this chapter's a little difficult. I mean, last week we were talking about healthcare and access to reproductive care and abortions. And then this week we're going to be talking about mass shootings and mental health, and how youth are kind of working their way through the broken system. And that's why this chapter is called Unbroken. Okay, so we're going to start here. This is the very first sentence in the chapter. To be a young Latinx in America right now is to understand that there are two stories to tell. And what those two stories always are, and this may not be specific to Latinx, but we're talking about Latinx. So it's the idea of where you currently are and identifying with that. And at the same time, also the idea of where you came from, or where you have been, or where your descendants have been, your ancestors have been. And that's just like a constant, like, I don't know if duality is the right word, but it's a constant in this community, in our community. And when we start talking a little bit more about like microaggressions, it's like that same thing about, if you're even a little bit ethnically ambiguous, you're going to be asked those questions like, where you from, know where you from, like that, where you really from, like those kinds of things. And it's confusing, and it can really be, it can really feel like your identity is constantly in question. So that's why she went looking for Latinx, right? Looking for those voices. When you guys read because I've read this a couple of times already, was this something that you were like, this is new, or did you feel like this is something that I know is happening because of the students I work with or the communities that I'm in? Did this catch your attention at all? The two?
I had to read it a couple times to fully acknowledge or even understand what was being said, because I had my own interpretation of it when I first looked at it. The notion of where you come from and really who cares as far as the world projects on to folks. We have this weird way, I think, of talking about folks who come south of the border as if that's the only immigration we have. Right? When other people immigrate from around the world, I've got one school district in California that I know of that has 40 different languages in their school district. But when we talk about immigration, it's always south of the border. And so when I was reading this, my first thought was, yeah, we have an immigration thing about you may be here today, but realize we always remind you that you came from someplace else.
Yeah.
But we don't do that to folks who immigrate from anywhere else. It's like, hey, congratulations, welcome here. and good to have you. So
Right.
that for me was the context that I first looked at that at.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I think where the double stories that I started to get was the trauma of major events like the massacre at the Walmart and those types of things, where students, especially Latino students, how they felt and threatened, and the changes in their lives because of those events, I think were important and were somewhat surprising to me, because as a white man, I hadn't thought of it from that angle before. And, we always look at the main event and what's happening, and, but never thinking about the repercussions and how that, especially in Texas, my gosh.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's talk about August 3rd, 2019, El Paso, Texas, at the Walmart. I feel like it's been a while since we've really had a conversation about gun control or mass shootings. I don't know if it's just there's so many other things that have been going on in the last couple of years that this 2019 thing seems pretty fresh to me. I don't know. Did you guys remember
to
this?
me? Well, as soon as I started to read it, I went, "Oh my God! I can't believe I actually forgot about it."
Yeah.
And that at the same time, I thought about, well, the similarities to this and Dylan Roof when he went into South Carolina, and I started thinking, yeah, that was just a couple years. Oh my goodness, that was 2015. And so I think it depends on which story you connect to. You can feel viscerally. Like I relate immediately to those folks in that church in South Carolina. They look like me. And so, but this one, it was kind of surprising for me that I had forgot about it. And I felt a little bit like in the story, the notion of suddenly we just kind of moved on. Like you said, she was there and there was all the signs that something had happened at that Walmart, but it was as if that had happened so long ago, the world had moved on. And so I recognized that, I didn't look like the people, so I moved on. But the folks who look like me in South Carolina in the church, that still sits with me. I'm still thinking about that one. And it brings up a lot of those emotions that come along with it. And so, I was immediately thinking about this notion of that thread of angry white supremacists who are angry at something.
Yeah.
They don't know, they can't tell you how any of those people he walked into there had a grievance with him. But their last names and the likelihood that they would be Latinx, that was pretty easy targets. And so they now receive my anger, you're my target, and I don't have any connection to you other than I've got this built up hate in the back of my head that comes from, oh, that's right, we had somebody who was sitting in the White House at that time who through campaign pledges and everything else said those people coming from the south part of the border, they're your enemy. They're the ones who are taking things from you. That's who you should be angry with about your economy and the jobs that you no longer have, which I find incredibly ironic that, again, I mentioned earlier, we've got immigration coming from around the world, and we've never made the folks, I think about Silicon Valley and all of the immigration they rely on to keep their industry growing and moving. And because it doesn't tend to come from the southern border, right? Which, if you really want to be angry with somebody, be angry with Silicon Valley because they're hiring away incredibly high-paying jobs, and they're not yours. Okay, that makes sense. But you're going to be angry because somebody is out working in a field and doing a job you don't want to do anyhow, and so you're going to go take. I don't get that one. Right? So, as I was saying, I think with this one, the whole notion of just this white supremacy that you exist, you remind me of who I was told I should have as an enemy, therefore you should die. It just, there's such a disconnect with that. I don't know, how do you ever get to that point?
Right. Driving too. It wasn't like he lived there.
Right. Yeah. That's even worse.
There.
Yeah, but this was preceded, if you remember, by at the Gilroy at the festival there.
I think
It
that's
just,
why I
just
remember
and so it just goes, and continued on, and I think that sometimes I don't know, I can't believe that we have it, and now we don't even, when a shooting happens, we had a shooting yesterday in Sacramento, and it seemed like that shooting took place weeks ago already, and that was just yesterday. And so it's what are we doing? I mean, to ourselves, and then imagine what our kids are going through,
it. Yes.
and especially kids, some of our students of color, when the targets were folks just like them, both in Gilroy and in El Paso. Yeah, the
We,
pain
you-
that happens there is crazy.
Richard, as you were saying that, I was thinking about Sacramento. It's just an hour down the street from me, if you will.
Mhm.
And I know exactly where the spot is. And I've been down there many times, lobbying legislature and et cetera. And that one doesn't have the long-term frightening impact for me. I can excuse that one. I can make some sense. Oh, young people being silly and poor judgment. Okay, I'm not likely to be in that crowd. But
Mm,
when I think about these folks who are in Texas and they're at the Walmart
right.
and they're just out going about their lives and they become the target, that one I would have to imagine,
Yeah.
as the book did a great job of pointing out, that one now tells everyone else who looks like them, look over your shoulder no matter where you go. You
Yeah.
could be next. Always think about the exit, where would you go and hide. I go down there, into Sacramento, the adjustment that I will make is, but I'm old, so it's not much of an adjustment. Hey, 10 o'clock, looks like it's time for me to get back into the hotel. Right?
Right.
I can
Yeah.
avoid that one. But I can't take my skin off and say, okay, now I'm free to wander the streets and not be worried. And
Mhm.
my accent is gone. So no one notices my accent. No one notices the color of my skin. Okay, I'm safe. Right. But I can extract myself from late night parties where I think judgment's going to start to be questionable at 1 o'clock in the morning, because I'm going to be in bed asleep by then anyhow. So I don't worry about that one. But I think, like you're saying, with these folks, that person drove hours from Dallas
Mhm.
to come all the way down there to the border to find folks who just happen to be the wrong color. Just like the folks who, like I said, he went into the church for looking for the folks who were the wrong color.
Yeah.
Those are those stories that have me looking over my shoulder from time to time. But you're right, still the gun violence that we have, we do have to wrap our heads around what do we do about that.
And this is just a tiny piece of of this chapter, but also of the whole story, right? Because she's bringing this up sort of to go into the mental health conversation. So it's like this horrible thing happened, but this is the aftermath. This is what people have to deal with after. I'm gonna pull up a comment that we have Sally saying. Book is happening. It should be added to. All of the books that we're reading here, right? You can get something out of all of the books. Thank you, Sally. Let's petition California to start putting these books into their curriculum. Okay, so there's this event, and then she immediately starts talking about the suffering, and so I like that she's using the word that there's suffering. I'm sorry, I think I have something right. The word is suffer, like they're suffering, and it's like what you were saying about now you have to look over your shoulder. Now there's something that you have to consider when you leave your house. If you're on a college campus, you have to think about that. I remember I think it was after the Florida Stoneman, what's the name of that high school?
Marjorie Douglas Stoneman.
Yes, here in our area, one of my cousins was thinking about, what am I going to do? One of my classrooms, one wall is all windows. And we're in California, right? But he's at a high school. And so like that environment is triggering. It doesn't matter where you are in the country when something like that happens. It's relatable because it's your age kids and in the place that you go to every day. So it's like the same thing. That suffering happens a lot of times in silence. And because of events like the one at Walmart, the shooting at the Walmart, statistically, Latino kids and teenagers are at greater risk of suffering from mental health problems than other demographics. This surprised me a little bit. And I don't know if it's because I'm in that community and I know what it's like to have those conversations, like with family and other, Latina moms, or do I know what the conversations are? And even if I have a conversation with a therapist who is also Latina, or I'm in a room full of professional women, I mean, the conversations don't come up. It's interesting, and I think that we all need to be aware of that. So some of the numbers, I'll pull up this one and then I'll ask you. Only 1 in 5 Latinos with symptoms of mental disorder will approach a doctor. Are you guys surprised by this? Does it just seem like any group, any minority, any migrant, any kind of other maybe suffers through this a little bit?
I think the statistics are underreported. I think they're worse than what we know, because not only is there a stigma in the community, we're just tough people here, and if you're part of poverty, then this is part of the deal. It's around survival, and you got to get up and go to do whatever the job is, regardless of how you feel, depressed or not. I have to get up and go work. So the stigma that comes with all of that, I think it automatically makes it that no matter how you get to that 1 in 5, I think it's got to be higher than that, because there's a lot of folks who are still not reporting it or are not acknowledging it, even though they can tell it, they can feel it, but I'm just not going to acknowledge it. And you look at the high rates of alcoholism, et cetera. And then I have one other thing I'll add is when I'm at some of the high schools doing, some of the programs that I'm doing, I will have 150, 200 kids in the gym, and I'll ask them, how many of you I'll ask the question around depression. How many of you have ever struggled with, know someone who struggles with depression in a very real sense? And I get over, I'd say probably like 70% of the room. And so there's like 150 students who are suddenly acknowledging it. And then when I say, please remain standing, if that person is you, everyone else, please be seated, I still have half the room standing. And I think that is consistent regardless of what community I'm in. So I really think we're sadly underreporting something that's a very serious crisis.
Yeah, I think you're right, because she even mentions in the book, what was it, almost 11% have attempted suicide. So 11% of the population with 10 to 24, 11%. That's an incredible number that have attempted suicide. And so I think you're right, Mike. I think the number is very unreported. And to say, 20% when 11% are attempting suicide, the numbers have to be higher.
That's another question that I will ask sometimes with the students, and I get half of them will say they've considered it, and then I get almost half of those who will still remain standing and say they've attempted. And so I look at the statistics that we see, the ones that get reported, and I always think that there's still so much stigma around acknowledging that, hey, I had a moment of weakness, I considered, or I attempted, that I think most people don't put their hands up and won't acknowledge, even if it is, anonymous surveys, just not going to acknowledge it. And sometimes I think it might even be, I won't acknowledge it to myself because I don't want to admit it to myself. So I think that doesn't surprise me at all. I think that's underreported. The number should be a lot higher. And I will say that I think it's very common, I would imagine, in neighborhoods where poverty is high. Right? I think it's just significant, the underreporting again, because people look around and they go, well, my life sucks. I should feel like this. Right? We don't have hardly anything. And so, I'm over it. So I think I have a real challenge with that number. And I think it's probably hiding something significantly more concerning to me.
So if we think about the lack of mental health services in schools, right? Some of that argument for pulling money away from law enforcement is so that we have more in school districts, so that we have more access to counselors on school sites versus law enforcement. So that's part of it. So if they're not able to talk about it anywhere, then, right? So then they can't talk about it in their house. They can't talk about it. They might talk about it with their friends, but then nobody does anything about it. And there's maybe someone that they can go to on campus, but it's not like an official licensed person. I know for us here, it seems like we have a lot of communication and coordination with our mental health services for kids and the school districts. It seems like they're really trying to get the kids, the attention and support and medication that they need outside of the school system. But I don't know what it's like at home. And I know that some of those conversations, it's even though the parents might take the kid in, they're going to have a hard time because they're doing it initially because the school says you need to go take your kid to this thing. They need a counselor. And maybe they'll go once or twice and then maybe they don't go anymore. Right. So it's that continuation, that follow-up, understanding, educating everybody. What does this actually mean? If they do need medication, what is the medication for? It's all connected. All of it is connected. Here's one of the other things about considering suicide more than white and Black students. And then I didn't pull up this article, but the name of the article from Refinery 29 is Latina Suicide Rates Are Out of Control. And then they explain why, specifically for girls. This is a statistic that Richard brought up a few minutes ago, because I guess he couldn't wait for me to pull it up. 10.5% of Latina adolescents aged 10 to 25 in the U.S. attempted suicide in the past year, compared to 7.3 of white females, 5.8 Latino, and 4.6 white male teens. And I forgot to take off the page number. It's fine. It's fine. So yeah, that number might seem low, but this is still a lot of kids. This is still a lot of kids, and they're saying adolescent, and they're pushing that adolescence to 24 years old, right? These people have already either got into the workforce, gotten into higher ed, some kind of training. Maybe they're even living on their own at this point. Maybe they're still living at home. So there's a lot of factors at each one of these stages, right? Because 10 years old, we're still pre-puberty, and then there's puberty, and then there's the teenage years, and then there's the young adults. So there's all of these things. This number, I mean, it's probably still low, but the factors included at all of these different age transitions, I think would be what probably blows us away. And if they took out, if they made the categories a little bit smaller, what would be the highest? What age would be the highest rate of attempted suicide? Right. I mean, that
I would almost say it has to be somewhere in that 8th grade to 10th grade. That's where I think you've nailed it when you talk about the transitions, and the transitions I see are the ones where we go from middle school to high school, or elementary to middle school, those natural transitions even. One of the things that we know is that if a student isn't feeling like they're connected as a freshman, and by the time they're a sophomore, you've got about 3 semesters, right? Really the first, that freshman year, and then part of that first part of their semester as a sophomore. And if they don't connect to the community and to the school by then, the odds are they're gone. So about 50% of all the kids who are going to leave tend to leave. The pattern is they leave in that first year and a half. When you think about kids who make it through that sophomore year, kids don't drop out their junior and senior year. They're good to go. It's usually that freshman and sophomore year, that's where connections are critical. And if I don't have a connection to somebody who's being successful, I'm going to struggle. And I think it kind of goes back to this notion of, who do I talk to? Right? I'm struggling already. My life, the hormones are all over the place. I'm trying to figure stuff out. I'm already questioning, do I belong now? And then questioning, why am I feeling so depressed? And say, who do I talk to? I think all of that is overwhelming. And I think it's part of the transitions, like you're talking about, whether it's, by grade or by body change and all those things. It's difficult.
Yeah, we're definitely not doing enough. Even with like first year experience kinds of things, either at the high school or college, first year experience courses and those kinds of support systems that we say we're putting in place because we're holding their hands. A lot of that does not take into account the maturity and the biological changes that are still happening in the brain, like, I mean, I mean, this is like major educational reform, right? But we're looking at like the kinds of material that we're forcing them, algebra, like I'm just thinking of math, but even like history or PE. I mean, all of these things that somebody decided had to be accomplished while you were 14 years old. When we think of it in those terms, especially knowing what we know in terms of the brain now, why are we forcing that on people? There's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to educate, right?
I think we're getting there. I think I'm going to give education a little bit of credit. I think we're making the slow motion conversation because you're right. We've got all the research that says, here's how the brain develops. Here's what people are interested in. Never mind what you did when you were growing up as a kid. Again, right. I pick on me and Richard because we were around when dinosaurs roamed the planet. Right? Yeah. And I at least I was. Right? And so I've just cut all the evidence
I was there. I was there.
So, and I look at this, I think people do what they were taught and modeled. Right? And so now I become a teacher and I figure, well, this was good enough for me. And we're starting to figure out, no, that was great back then, but the world has changed so much in terms of job creation. What are we supposed to, we're supposed to prepare you for college and careers, and for careers that we don't have a clue what they're going to be in 10 years. So we're shifting some of that finally, but it's a slow motion turn. Yeah, it's a big behemoth, and the ability to turn it on a dime, that's non-existent. But I think we have to keep having the conversation. The mental health aspect of it alone is the one that I really see is starting to take more and more hold in the conversations, that we're starting to recognize it's not because kids are soft, it's because kids are honest and they've dealt with trauma, right? And they're more honest than us. Like I said, Richard and I are going to wander around, and one of my favorite comics is Bill Burr. And he always likes to joke about how whenever he starts to feel these emotions, he just takes a couple steps and crushes it back down, and he gets it under control, and he's fine again. And that's what we were taught, right? I'm supposed to not, I'm very emotional. I'll cry. Stuff happens all the time. And when I do that in front of my sons, they look a little surprised. But if I do that in front of other people who have only known me for a short amount of time or in a different context, they're not surprised at all. But for my boys, it's, oh, dad's crying. Oh, there must be something really terrible going on. We hardly ever see him cry. And I always think, how do you never see me cry? I cry all the time. What the heck? How did you miss it? Oh, that's right. You were born. You were a baby. You didn't see me weep openly. Okay, I got it. Okay. And so I think in my family, my household, that's just kind of the way it was always done. And we just didn't acknowledge it, or we'd just go out and have a drink with the guys and get over it. So I think that's part of the big change that's happening is young folks have decided they're incredibly honest, and they acknowledge the stuff that's going on. And then they will do what they can to organize and make changes that we never thought about when we were kids. You mentioned Marjorie Stoneman Douglas because of the conversations with especially one of the young men who's in this chapter. I think about how they somehow, my classmates and we can't organize our 40th year reunion. I don't know what it is about us, but somehow these young people after that tragedy organized across the entire nation. Right. And went out and protested and marched, and they did it as high school students. And I can't get my class to organize. It's like 100 of us still around. We can't pull together a class reunion, but these kids could just like that mobilize a nation and make an argument and a statement. And I think that's why I said, Letty, for me, part of it, I do have some hope because I don't know whether it's just because they understand technology and the social media platform. Yeah, they get it more than I ever will. And they mobilized an entire nation. And then what did my folks say to them? What do you young kids know? They know the truth. It's like, and they are out in front of people saying, we got to do something about this. This is unacceptable. And this is part of why it just feels this way for me. And the ribbon below the name there is scrolling by. It says Unbroken. And I just keep thinking about, that's a perfect description for these young people who refuse to just play it off as if it didn't happen. They are taking a stance and really supporting each other throughout this whole thing. And I just think, yeah, young people are amazing to me. They're something else.
They are not afraid. They're not afraid to I was telling Richard, maybe it was yesterday, I have a couple of classes that I'm teaching in the evenings, and these are 7th through 12th graders. It's an entrepreneurship class, and we're talking about, you know, coming out of the pandemic, going back to school, being in the classroom, and procrastination, lack of motivation, all of these things. And they're feeling their feelings in the class, and they're telling me these things, and I'm like trying not to bawl in class. And they all talk about having a therapist, how many times they go to therapy, how much they appreciate the conversations about what can I do when I'm not motivated. And I'm like, you're 12. You're 12, and you're having these conversations. So I'm seeing, like you're saying, like I'm seeing that shift in the kids. It's going to be harder for us because we don't imagine, I'm going to pull this up. We don't imagine that something like this, that there's any amount of sadness going along with those suicide attempts or suicide rates, right? That somehow it's being taken care of. And then we don't want to be in the room when those conversations happen because they're so difficult. We are not in touch with our feelings, and we are making it harder for them to talk about it. That's sort of like the sense that I got from these kids that I've been with in the last few weeks. And then
I see that all the time. I can tell you it's really easy for the adults. It's because, so when I have the kids in the room all day, 100, 250, and sometimes I'll have 5 or 6 teachers in the room. It's amazing to me when the conversations get really deep. The kids lock in and they get closer together. A lot of the adults suddenly have to go run an errand, or they got to go straighten out something else, or they need to go get the box of Kleenex for the kids to cry. And I've already taught the juniors and seniors who are part of the group how to manage all of that. And it's this sense of discomfort, like you said. It's a heavy conversation. And thank God I'm an adult. I don't have to sit in this. The kids, but you kids, you sit right there, and the adults scurry away. I was like, no, that's your discomfort with honest, real conversations, and you're not quite sure what to do for them. Hey, your job is easy. Listen. That's all they need you to do is listen. And the kids even say that to each other. Hey, look, you need someone, I'll listen. Right? Again, I think kids get it and they understand it. It's us older. I'm pointing towards Richard's box. It's us older people.
I do want to sort of say, first, I want to apologize to Mike, because when you were talking about dropout rates in junior or early on, and people don't drop out when they're juniors and seniors, I dropped out my senior year. I chuckled. I didn't want you to think I was a jerk by laughing at people dropping out. So,
not a problem. Not a problem.
But I feel like I recovered somewhat, and the bad dreams of dropping out have finally ended. But
think about this. I want to acknowledge you for a second. There are just a few who drop out their junior and senior year, and I'm going to guess there was an extenuating circumstance that pushed you out.
Oh yeah, but it doesn't seem like it was valid now when I talk about it.
That doesn't matter. I wasn't going to say anything about it.
Letty knows me well.
I wasn't going to say what. I was just saying there's usually an extenuating.
Yeah.
But freshmen and sophomore. So my point is that for juniors and seniors, it's usually we do something that's silly, or we look back and go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that one. Freshmen and sophomores, they disappear. That connection point, or to middle school, that connection point, they disappear because they just are overwhelmed and don't feel connected.
Yeah.
And so it's silly behavior. I saw a couple people that got sent along the way because of something silly. Just, whatever it was.
Yeah, that's right.
But the other stuff is just that I don't feel connected. I don't know who will support me, love me. Do I feel like I'm in the right place or whatever? And I don't catch on early enough. Richard, you were all the way riding through. It was just, again, I had a couple other friends who made some silly mistakes. And it's like, ooh, that's going to cost you. And they knew it. And that's different. But so no apologies necessary. I may have find one of those or two myself.
Yeah. But but Letty's talking about, the students in her class, the youngsters, the willingness to talk about, that vulnerability of putting themselves out there and talking about therapy, those kinds of things. And that's a positive sign. And then I watch at the college level, and I've got psychology as one of my programs in one of my departments, and they're all the psychologists' offices are like right straight down from my office, so I see it every day. And so the students that join the psychology course, I sometimes wonder what their motivation is. A lot of them, where on this, and it's psychology is office hours are spent. There's students in rows waiting to meet with their teacher. And I've talked to the teacher and they said, it is very much like therapy. What I'm doing during office hours, very much like therapy. And they actually refer students, they talk to them, that kind of thing. And but I only see that in the psychology classes. I've got history and I've got political science, office hours, they're sitting around twiddling their thumbs, waiting for students to come by. But the psychologists see a lot of students during office hours. But the reason I point that out is because that demonstrates to me that we don't have enough mental health available for people that are 18 to 24, and that's our major demographic, and which is unfortunate because it seems like we're starting to cover it at the younger ages, but then what happens as they go into adulthood and they seem to get dropped off, and then that cycle will continue if we don't do something about it.
Good point. Very good point.
Okay, the APA conducted a study that found perceived racial ethnic discrimination was consistently linked to poor mental health, lower academic achievement, and more engagement in risky or negative behavior. And this kind of goes along with what you're saying, what you said earlier, Mike, about what's the socioeconomic status in the community, around the school, if we're dealing with just students. This is something that I mentioned before, where I had talked to someone that's in like a mental health or healthcare here, and me asking, can we do something like these book discussions? Can we go in and talk about the disparities when it comes to race and healthcare, and can that be part of like your push for healthcare community care outreach to the community? And the response I got was that there wasn't a problem with race in our area. And I don't know what, like this, they're like directly related to people's healthcare and mental health. So like, I don't understand this idea that it's separate. When we know, like all of these studies, they just keep coming out with like the connections to dealing with this kind of thing, especially after a shooting, right? If we want to talk about living in that kind of heightened anxiety all the time and what that does to your heart, what that does to your brain.
I had a friend who explained that to me, made so much sense when he explained it. He said, if you were designed to see the bear comes out, we fight, flight, or freeze, and all that stuff goes on, and the adrenaline hits, and we deal with it. Mm-hmm. He said, but if the bear comes home every day at 5 o'clock, drunk, stopped off at the bar on the way home from work, and now you see that every day, we're not designed to deal with that. And that's that mental health aspect. That's the long-term part of it. And in those families, typically, the rule is don't talk, don't trust, and don't feel. And so they go through school. So, Richard, I'm not surprised that you're seeing that once you're out of high school, that 18 to 24 year range, you still probably miss and need all the things that you got, all the support that you got in high school now that we're making available more and more, but still not even close to enough. Right. And then suddenly you're an adult, and that the adult world is still go get a job, and we ain't got time to deal with your silliness. Get to work. You don't know what the tough life is all about yet. I think we're gonna figure it out. It's just I'm with you. I've got a sense of urgency that we need to do it quicker. Yeah, mm-hmm. Can we do it a little bit? Can we pick up the pace a little bit and provide? Because we still are dealing with the stigma. All right, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. All right, now what do? Drink. And now I become the next bear that comes home every day at 5 o'clock, having stopped off at the bar. And again, here we go, the cycle repeats.
So given the connection that the APA is making with, this discrimination, the racial identity that's causing this, lower academic achievement and more mental health issues, more physical, healthcare issues. There's this experience that Latinos experience a type of discrimination in which they're viewed as perpetual foreigners. So it doesn't matter if you are in either of those two, I'm from over here or I'm from here. It doesn't matter, because even if you are born here, you're still othered. There's still like an othering that happens. And because of that, there's never a rest, right? And I think that that's why maybe a lot of us, and maybe Mike, you'll agree with this, and you can talk about it a little bit, but the idea that sometimes we just need to be around people who understand the experience. They understand, they speak our language, whatever that language is. They want to snack on the same kinds of food and drink the same kind of drinks and talk about the same shit that everyone's been dealing with on a daily basis. And then it feels like therapy. But it's because of that perpetual foreigner feeling. And it doesn't matter that more than 80% of Latinos in the United States under the age of 35 were born here. More than 80%.
And that's why I say I think we have two different forms of immigration conversation. We've got immigration that comes from south of the border, and just by the mere notion of having an accent, we see random videos every now and then of really poor behavior, whether it was, the Karen phenomenon that I had to deal with because someone would call the police on me because I'm watching birds, right? Or whether it's the fact that we see someone yelling at somebody in a store, in a public place, and saying, "We're here in America, speak English."
Right.
What? How do you know I'm not visiting with, how do you know this isn't my great grandma visiting me and I'm taking my great grandma to the store? She doesn't speak English because she lives in Mexico, but she's here visiting me. And now you're telling me to speak English. All the stuff that has to go through somebody's head to now turn and hear an accent and suddenly decide you're a foreigner. Yeah, I lived here all my life, but now I'm a foreigner. Okay, I got it. And that has to be exhausting.
Well, there's always the come back where you came from, no matter who was in. I mean, that's just been forever, right? Go back to where you came from, and it's like, you know what? I don't remember any Latinos on the Mayflower, so.
Oh, that was good. I like that. I'm going to borrow that.
That should be a t-shirt.
That should be a t-shirt.
Right, you heard it here. Next shirt. There were no Latinos on the Mayflower. Okay. I'm gonna switch a little bit. This perpetual foreigner thing. I'm gonna go back to the El Paso Walmart shooting because we're gonna kind of visit the college, right? What is it? The University of Texas in El Paso. Yeah. And so the interviews that she conducted, just walking around, talking to students, and maybe it took her a little while she said, for people to kind of like open up. How do you feel about what happened? And maybe some people are trying to not think about it. So I'm just going to go through some of the things that they said. We already kind of talked about this at the top of the hour, but these are just the things that the students are saying. I was really scared to go back to school. Okay, this happens down the street, and now I'm here, and there's a bunch of us brown people. Maybe we're next. Maybe my classes are going to be shot up. Maybe that's something I have to think about. How am I ever going to feel safe in the place that I study? I'm trying to improve my life and get a degree. I'm paying to be here. And now I don't feel safe. And then this constantly, right? What if something happens? Anything. What if anything happens? I feel scared to go out places, but I'm kind of getting used to it. This is the worst part, right? I mean, we talk about, shooting yesterday, and then we're already moving on. So we're all used to it. But then when it happens in your neighborhood, you just have to keep going. Go to therapy, right? We hope people can somehow get that help. But these are student voices, right? This is what the students are saying. This is the 18 to 24 age group, right? Because they're at the university. So I wanted to share, you know, what she encountered with the students when she had the conversations with them. And then this idea of the other, the perpetual foreigner, that pain, that long time discrimination. I know we're focusing on Latinx, and I keep saying, God, it's not just us, right? Because we've had these conversations over the last year and a half. But I feel like it's like what you're saying, Mike, about there only being one kind of immigrant. And we're only ever focusing on that. In the same way that when people talk about Hispanics or Latinos, when they use those phrases, they're thinking of Mexicans. Like that's what they're thinking. They're thinking of Mexicans, and they're thinking that calling someone Mexican is derogatory. Like Mexican is the bad word. That's the other part of it. So they're trying to offend everybody on all these levels, not understanding the whole idea of not being a monolith, right?
Well, and that's the thing that you usually hear is the racist statement, if we get there, is about you Mexicans.
Mm-hmm.
No one does the racist thing by saying you Latinx. No one.
Too inclusive.
Yeah, it's like you Latinx people. Let me be politically correct. No, they're just going, look, you Mexicans, and then throw in whatever the derogatory term is. And and I think about, as the pain of long time discrimination, etc. I can relate to some of that. Can't relate to necessarily what it would be like to have to be considered the immigrant all the time. I get the opposite. I get the one about, how do you know your family didn't immigrate here? Well, because I already did the work. I got a cousin. We did the math. We know we've traced our slavery back to a certain plantation in Tennessee. And that person looked at me, oh, because they were about to make some great point. Like, I didn't immigrate. My family didn't immigrate here. My family, whatever. But for the Latinx generation, the crowd, that is always being treated as if you are the foreigner. I mean, when Ahmaud Arbery was shot and murdered, I know when I jog often. And so I jog often with the hoodie. And I'm out running now, it's because this right here gets a little cold at first when I go out to run, right? So I got the hoodie and I'm out running, then I'll flop it off. But I know that I kept thinking to myself, how do I make sure that I am as visible as possible so no one accidentally thinks the wrong thing about me? And I'm thinking all this stuff. I'm in my mid 50s at the time. Now I'm in my late 50s, but at the time it was like mid 50s. And I'm thinking, 56, 57, thank God I have the coping mechanisms that a lot of these young people don't have. And so they don't have the coping mechanisms, and they're dealing with exactly the same things, only on a constant basis, that they too are being questioned for all the things we've already mentioned. And they don't have the coping mechanisms or the ability to just turn around and walk out of school, walk out of class because the teacher is exhibiting these microaggressions and then treats them as if they're being childish for mentioning the microaggressions. Right? And so, yeah, it's a tough world. I got to admit, there are sometimes I look back on life and I think, thank God I was born in the 60s, because being born now, there's a lot of stuff that's going on. How do you deal with it? And I certainly wouldn't want to be going through that stuff prior to the 60s that went on for Black people. So I think about this all the time and like, yeah, I think I hit the sweet spot. This is where I'm supposed to be.
We're going to step into people's homes right now for a second. This quote, I love this. Calladita te vas más bonita. So I heard this growing up. Basically, it's like, you're more beautiful when you're quiet. And so these things are, about being outspoken in your own family. And so when we carry this around with us out in the real world and we are scared or we do need help, how are we supposed to go find it? Even if it's available and right in front of us, we don't know how to access it. We don't have that skill set because we were told that we actually needed to be as invisible as possible, right? Be as invisible as possible because you don't know who's going to other you in the moment. So this quote, I feel like I know there was a lot of people that probably would relate to something like this. There's probably video of this, and I wish I had thought about other than just right this second. We had an author, the author of I'm going to screw this up. Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, something like that. I'm fucking up the title. Sorry. The author was there. She was the keynote at this conference I went to, and she read this poem that she had never read out loud to anyone. And a lot of, like half of it was a list of things that she'd been told. And I'm not kidding when I tell you people were bawling in that space, because it was like, yes, I've heard that. I've heard that. I've heard that. Of course, we were all like adding our own, and this was probably one of them. But it was like all of the things that you're told as a woman, one, but as a Latina, and then as the perpetual foreigner, to protect us, right? I mean, our parents were trying to protect us, but it doesn't work. As we're growing, these generational shifts are happening, and it's like, yeah, I'm gonna speak up about my mental health. I'm gonna seek help. I want to talk to you about it. Grandma, is it okay if we talk about it? Mom, is it okay if we talk about it? And even for me, it's been really, really difficult until like recently, right? I'm gonna be 46 this year, and I think this year may be the first time if I said to my mom, I'm going to therapy, that she doesn't make a comment about it. She's like, I guess you have a stressful life. And I'm like, thank you, bye. Like, that's it.
That's a victory. If that's all you hear, that's
Yeah.
a victory. That must be a stressful. Yes, and you're making it even more stressful right now, but that's okay. I'm going to breathe. Yeah.
Yep.
Again, I think it goes back to us. Again, I'm going to say us older folks, and I will pick on me because that was my family. We just didn't have those conversations, and I think about some of the when I look back on it. I remember my grandmother when I tried to figure out how old she was at one point. It was that was treated exactly as all the other conversations I'm not supposed to have. Right? Don't worry about that. It's none of your business. Just go on about you gotta. All right, I'll move on now. And it's like, at what point do we get to be treated like, supposed to be an adult? Well, that wasn't going to happen as long as Juanita She was around. It's like, nah, don't worry about it. It's none of your business. Move on about. All right, sounds good. So I think that's a victory if the only thing you're hearing is, oh, it must be stressful because, again, that generation doesn't know what to say.
Right.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say back. And again, it's now you don't have to say anything. It could just be, tell me more about that.
Mm-hmm.
In the saying, dígame?
Dígame?
Yeah,
Like,
that's what I've heard before. Yeah, tell me more. And it's just, that's the problem that so many folks run into, is they argue with the experience of these kids, these folks in the story. It's like, don't argue with their experience, just hear it. You don't have to tell them their interpretation of their story is wrong and how they feel. All right, that explains the mental problems that we have. It's like, no, it's their feelings, and they acknowledge it. There's some truth in it.
But this is why it's hard, because so many of us are still the first, right? There's a lot of this, and then we talked a lot about this when we talk about caste. The system is not built to support firsts. It's not built around that. It's like, no, we prefer generational recommendation. We prefer white people. So it's hard to be in a system that does not accept you in the first place. And then if you are the first in your family, if you're the first in that community, it's just not, the system is not built for you if you are a first. Then there's this. There has to be a point, right, when students get to a certain age and they really start understanding and become more self-aware of their place in the world. The example in the classroom, somebody makes a joke about a gardener, and then that's when this realizes that, oh shit, they're talking about my family. That's my dad, that's my tío, like that's what this is racist. This is racism, and I am now experiencing it. And then you can't go back. You can't unsee it. You can't unhear it. Your life has changed forever because your skin color has been weaponized against you.
Yeah. And that was something that the trauma in a national event where a certain person gets elected president, and then that trauma starts. That's something that I knew that, I knew for me, it was just a matter of my person lost the election. That's what I was thinking. I was like angry that my person lost the election, but not knowing the reverberation that happened because of that and the trauma it caused in communities of color. And that's the part where I was like, wait a minute, as I was reading the book, I didn't think of that. And I felt really bad about that. But
You
Oh.
should feel bad about that.
yes,
I,
I was sitting on the couch next to you.
yeah.
I didn't see, Richard. I'm going to go one step further. It didn't even occur to me because I was never concerned for Black Americans because I'm American. I didn't even think twice about it. Right. And so I was like you, but I did have the concern for the Latinx community because he spent so much time and there were so many Facebook and social media arguments about immigration all of a sudden. And again, I'm shielded from that. And so I was like, look, he's the one who's been busy talking about rapists and thieves and murderers, whatever the language was back then. When they're not sending us their brightest, they're sending it. No one's sending you anything. People are fighting to get here for one thing. So shut up. No one's sending. Hey, you raped somebody? All right, get on the bus. No, not that bus. That's the bus for murderers. Bus for rapists are over there. No one was sending everybody. It was just folks trying to do whatever they could to get to wherever they wanted to be. And so that was my concern immediately. And my outrage the first time I started hearing about school kids being as verbose and thoughtless as some of the adults, that was when I just thought, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
All this faith I have in students, and now they're flying that bravado and stepping into this supremacy, and they don't even realize it because no one thinks that they're being a racist or a white supremacist. That's some other guy who's wearing a robe and a hood. No, it's some of the things that your kids are now saying. And that they, the story I have coming into my head was a young lady who found out that she was one of the kids that was being traded in a mock slave auction that was on TikTok. So now I think about what that must have been like for her, and then to realize what that was like for anyone who's suddenly, when Trump wins, the kids walk in and they go, yeah, the wall, I need somebody to mom, and all of a sudden they become that vicious, nasty person again. Yeah. And then they are protected because someone says, well, that's just kids being kids. No, that is not. That is assholes teaching other kids how to be assholes. Right. We can cuss on your show. I just realized that. All right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I do agree with you. And I think even though I understood what a horrible person Trump was, for some reason I was so naive and in thinking, okay, we'll get through this 4 years and we'll try again. But how much damage was done in that 4 years is just mind blowing. Exactly what you're talking about, Meg.
I'm with you. I look back at that now. I remember some friends told me that this was going to unravel the world. Not that, look, you're overselling this. It's not that big a deal. It's America. We're pretty tight on things, and the nation doesn't swing one way or the other. Richard almost said exactly what you said, word for word. Yeah, 4 years, we'll deal with it. Yeah. Holy moly. I did not know all the guardrails are going to come off of everything, leading to that thing where, the true patriots, whoops, by the way, the true patriots don't look like Letty or me. They don't look brown or black, right? Because we say those are true patriots. But then we look at who spends the most time in the military giving their lives. They look like, black and brown. And so I think this is that weaponization of skin. That's the subtle thing about the dog whistles, is that there's been enough of the stereotypes made that if I just make the joke about, whoa, looks like we're going to have to find somebody else to cut our lawn, I don't have to be out and come out and say, I'm talking about my Mexican neighbor across the street who actually cuts lawns for a living. Right. I don't have to say I'm talking about him, but everybody knows that's what I'm hinting at. That's the thing that's so diabolical about having your skin color being weaponized. It becomes the dog whistle. I just make the statement. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. And now if I'm that kid, I'm just like, oh my God, I don't feel safe anymore. I don't know who I can trust in this room, because now the person who I used to think was such a neat person just made the most insensitive joke whatsoever. And the class laughed. Like, oh, all right. Well, that's how we're going to be here. I become a little more nervous and I'm withdrawn, and now I don't want to connect.
Yes, absolutely. So talking about the strength of our youth, right? The way that they are attempting to connect with each other. And this is the last quote that I pulled from the chapter: confronting what's broken to come out of the other side unbroken, because they are still thinking. I mean, we still have these sort of idealist conversations also about change that can happen, and making things better, improving things for, like, you know, my kid, his friends, like your grandkids. Like we're still working towards this, but they are in it, fighting for their own lives. I mean, they're committing to helping each other out. And I do like, sort of at the end of the chapter before this quote, actually, and it was that kid from Stoneman Douglas High School that talked about, you start to compare trauma, right? You start to compare trauma. And I mean, I did it this hour, you know, talking about, like, well, it's not just us, it's everybody. It's like we can focus on one story at a time, and I don't have to belittle or diminish my story just because it doesn't sound as traumatizing as someone else's story. It's still part of that system, and we can keep talking about caste. It's all part of the system, and this is how the system was built, and we're all just trying to survive. This is a survival. Any last comments? We're at the top of the hour, so I want to wrap up.
I think we have got to become better at just hearing each other's stories. The saying is, it's hard to hate someone when you know their story. And what I have seen from doing work at schools over the years is that once you get people to hear the story, don't judge it, don't add meaning to it, just hear it. It's incredibly easy to love someone else. So when I think about all the conversations we're having about, if we talk about the truth about history, we're somehow trying to teach white kids to feel guilty and hate themselves, and to see Black and brown kids as incapable. I've seen the exact opposite happen time and time again, every single time, that when we allow kids to be open and honest about their experiences in life, the amount of empathy in the room shoots through the roof, as kids just say, oh my goodness, I just need to be a better human being to you. If you ever need something and you see me, stop me and pull me aside, and I will sit and I will just listen. And their level of, the depth of empathy and the level of humanity that comes out of them is wonderful. And that's why I think that we have just got to get to the point where it's, I hear your story, Letty, and done. And just listen without saying, oh, you interpreted that wrong. Oh, well, that may have happened, but you don't have to let it impact you. And the second I hear people say to me, well, that may have happened to you, you may have been around some races, but you don't have to let it impact your life. It's usually right after they told me that racism doesn't exist. So, and then they say, well, you don't have to let it impact your life. And then I have to stop and look at them and go, did you just acknowledge that I dealt with something racist in my lifetime? Well, I guess there goes that first premise. And so once we start to just hear people's story and quit judging it and just hear it for what it is, for their experience, that's when we can start to make some real change. And that's what we've got to get to the point where it's okay to be honest in all the aspects of what we've been talking about through this whole show tonight, is that people have stories, they are true to them and their life and their experiences. And then if we just acknowledge that, we can start to change a lot of this other silliness that we're dealing with all the time. Because that one kid who makes that racist statement about the lawnmower needing a new gardener, once he's heard the story of this other student who father is doing the best he can to feed the family by mowing someone else's lawns, all of a sudden that kid who is going to make the stupid joke looks and goes, ooh, I can't make that stupid joke because that's about my friend over there. And we start to see people as humans again, and we start to humanize them. And that's where we've got to get to at some point. So I'm going to say thank you for continuing to keep pushing these conversations and these book clubs. This is why I keep coming back. Even though I'm in way over my head. I'm not Latinx. And as I read the book, and more I realize, don't have to be. Just have to be willing to hear the story and acknowledge it. That's all that's needed. All right, I'm in.
Yeah, if our constant message has been, you know, we're talking about humanity here. We're talking about humanity, so we have to keep having the conversations. It's last week, it was women's reproductive health, and I know, I don't know if Keith, if you're watching, I'm gonna out you. There was a couple of messages. We went back and forth, like, I don't know, I don't feel comfortable. I don't, can I talk about abortion? This is women's health. And I was like, These are human beings that are not receiving health care. That's the stance that I'm going to take, and that's the conversation that we're going to have. And I don't care what your religious beliefs are. I don't care what your individual beliefs are. If you think that this should even be offered, we're talking about human beings and the way that they're being treated. And so then he was like, okay, I'm in. And I mean, there's no other way to think about these things when we want to talk about finding Latinx, and searching for the voices that are creating this identity. These are human beings, and they're not foreigners, and they are your kids' friends, and they are your future. They're coming. They're here and they're coming.
Amen.
Did you have a last, Richard?
No, Mike's statement was perfect to end the show, and I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Next Monday is the 11th, and I know we're going into spring break for a lot of people, but we will be here. Chapter 6, she's moving from the Southwest into the South, and I think this is pronounced Quetzal. This is Mayan language that I don't remember how to pronounce now. There's going to be a lot of conversation of Mayan communities in the South, and it's a really interesting chapter. I really like it. So that's next week. And then reminder again, get these books. They're awesome, and we're going to support Latinx authors during this time. Okay, thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. We love having you. We will have you back in a couple weeks, 3
I think so.
weeks.
Consider yourself warned. I'll be back.
Yay.
Yay, it's coming
Go to
back.
the store, shop for some shirts. We'll put a couple more designs up, and that will be fun. All right. See you next week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
See you later,
everybody.
guys.
Bye.